Okay, so what we're going to do here is something a little different. We're going to become historical detectives. We're on a case, trying to solve one of the biggest mysteries of all time, but tracking down the origins of one of the most powerful ideas humanity has ever had, the idea of God. So, let's start digging.
So, where does an idea like that even come from? I mean, it's a huge question, right? But to answer it, we're not going to be looking up at the sky. No, we're going to be digging into history, into archaeology, and into the pages of ancient texts to look for clues. Now, for billions of people, the answer starts with the Bible. But here's our very first clue. The Bible isn't one single book. It just isn't. It's much better to think of it as a library, a whole collection of scrolls and texts written by all sorts of different people in different places over hundreds and hundreds of years. And because it's a library written over so much time, the idea of God inside its pages doesn't stay the same. It changes, it evolves. The God you meet in the early texts is, well, he's very different from the God you find in the later ones. And that evolution, that change, that's the mystery we're here to solve. All right, so let's get into it. Our investigation begins with what we can call the God puzzle. And like any good mystery, we've just got to follow the clues. And our first clue is the name of our main character, a god named Yahweh. That's spelled Y-H-W-H. You've probably heard it pronounced as Yahweh. So let's see if we can trace where he came from.
And check this out. Our first big piece of evidence comes from one of the oldest poems in the entire Bible. It's like finding an ancient, preserved memory. And it gives us a location, a starting point. It says Yahweh comes out of Seir and from the land of Edom. Now, here's why that's so important. Those places, Seir, Edom, they're all way down south, outside the traditional homeland of ancient Israel. So the earliest texts seem to be telling us that Yahweh wasn't originally from Israel at all. He's basically an immigrant god, a powerful, thundering storm god from the southern deserts who was later adopted by the Israelites. But here's where the story takes a really surprising turn. It seems this immigrant god, well, he didn't arrive alone. The next part of our investigation reveals something that might sound a little shocking today. For a long time, Yahweh had company. So let me just ask you this. Was Yahweh always alone? Was he always understood as this single, solitary being? For a really long time, that's what everyone thought. But then, archaeologists started digging, and they found something that completely changed the picture. This is the bombshell. It's an inscription scratched onto a piece of pottery nearly 3,000 years ago. It's a simple blessing, but look at who it's from. It's a blessing by Yahweh of Samaria and his Asherah. So who or what is his Asherah? Well, it turns out Asherah was a big deal. She was a major mother goddess in the region. And the evidence, both from archaeology and even hidden in the Bible itself, it all points to the same thing. For many ancient Israelites, she was Yahweh's wife, his divine partner. People had statues of her, sometimes right there inside Yahweh's own temples. For a time, the God of Israel had a goddess. Okay, so if Yahweh had a divine partner, where'd she go? What happened to her? How did he go from being one of a divine couple to being the only one? The answer, incredibly, isn't really about religion. It's about politics. A massive political crisis sparked a theological revolution. So let's just look at the history for a second. In the late 700s BCE, the terrifying Assyrian Empire comes crashing down. They smash the northern kingdom of Israel and leave the southern kingdom, Judah, as a tiny, weak state, completely at their mercy. 100 years later, in this atmosphere of total crisis, a Judean king named Josiah decides to make a radical change. Now, Josiah's big idea wasn't quite monotheism, not yet. It was something called monolatry. It's the idea that, sure, other gods might exist for other countries, but for us, for Judah, there is only one God worth worshiping, Yahweh. All other gods, and especially his wife Asherah, had to go. It was a power move, designed to unify the nation and centralize all control, political and religious, in his capital, Jerusalem. And how they pulled this off is just brilliant. They basically took a weapon from their enemies and used it against them. See, Assyrian political treaties all demanded one thing: absolute, total, exclusive loyalty to the emperor. You had to love the emperor with all your heart. So Josiah's reformers, they took that exact language of political loyalty and applied it to God. They swapped out the emperor for Yahweh.
It was a revolutionary political and theological hack. But that wasn't the end of the story. Worshipping one god among many wasn't enough. It was going to take an even bigger disaster, an even deeper national trauma to push them to make the final leap, from worshipping their one god to believing in the only God.
And in 587 BCE, the unthinkable happens. The next superpower, the Babylonian Empire, rolls in and does what the Assyrians couldn't. They burn Jerusalem to the ground, they demolish the temple, God's own house, and they drag the smartest, most influential people into exile, hundreds of miles away in Babylon. This was it. The end.
I mean, just think about it for a second. In the ancient world, if your nation gets wiped out, it can only mean one thing. Your god lost. Their gods were stronger than your God. By all the logic of the time, the destruction of Jerusalem should have been the end of Yahweh.
But out of that total devastation, something completely new and world-changing was born: true monotheism. The thinkers in exile came up with a breathtakingly radical idea. They said, no, Yahweh didn't lose. He's actually the God of the entire world, and he used the Babylonians to punish us. Those so-called gods of Babylon, they're not real. They're just worthless statues, chunks of wood and stone.
And you can hear this brand new theology loud and clear in texts that were written during that exile. This quote from the book of Isaiah is one of the most explicit statements you'll find. It completely reframes reality. Yahweh isn't just the God of one little nation anymore. He is the one true universal God of everything and everyone, the only one there is. Now, this invention, this idea of a single universal God, it wasn't just some abstract philosophical shift. It was an idea that would go on to reshape human history with profound and lasting consequences. And you know, when you take something that big out of a system, it leaves a hole. With the goddess Asherah gone, the feminine aspect of the divine was lost. So the system had to find ways to compensate. Later biblical writers started using feminine language for God, describing his love as being like a mother's. Eventually, they even personified the idea of wisdom, or Chokmah, as a female figure who was there with God at the dawn of creation. It was a way of smuggling the feminine back in. And that brings us right here to the end of our investigation. What this whole journey shows us is that the idea of God was never really a static thing handed down once and for all. It was shaped by history, by politics, by national tragedies. It has been constantly invented and reinvented. And that leaves us with one last big question. If this incredibly powerful idea has changed so much in the past, what does its future look like? Where is it going next?